All right, we're looking at hydrotherapy here. We're in part 8, looking at the theory and practice of hydrotherapy. So far, we've been working on looking at more of the theory, and then we'll get into the practice here in a short little while here. But just a reminder, as you encounter any health crisis or challenge, try to find someone you can work with that shares a similar philosophy of care. This is just another tool in the toolbox that you can use, and just make sure that you're not blindly accepting anything that comes along, but do your due diligence in researching anything that comes along that seems like it might be helpful. Thomas Edison said in January of 1903 that the doctor of the future won't be giving any medicine, but instructing patients in the care of their own bodies and what they eat and the cause and prevention of disease. And back in 1885, Ellen White said the same thing in Testimonies for the Church, that there's only one way that heaven approves for practicing the healing art. And most of those are in fact, all of those are readily available to everybody. Pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God. They do take practice, but they are less expensive in the long run than the drug paradigm and medications that are expensive both in cost as well as the effect on the body. 3 John 1 verse 2 says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." And the soul is a key part of the health of the body, and so many people neglect that aspect of their health. In Romans 12, 1 and 2, we are admonished to present our bodies as living sacrifices that are holy and acceptable to God. So not unholy sacrifices, they're unacceptable, but holy ones. It's our reasonable service. So it's not our unreasonable service, but it's something that is considered to be reasonable within our grasp, especially with the help of God and his divine power. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. In the Ministry of Healing, the interesting quote that I found this week, the knowledge that man is to be a temple for God, a habitation for the revealing of his glory, should be the highest incentive to the care and development of our physical powers. Fearfully and wonderfully has the Creator wrought in the human frame, and he bids us make it our study, understand its needs, and act our part in preserving it from harm and defilement. So we need to study our physiology, to know how it acts, listen to our bodies, and know how it responds to various things. And if positive, continue. If negative, step away from it. And listen to the natural laws that God has put into place, and our bodies obey those natural laws. So there's a number of different objectives that are in hydrotherapy, and we'll talk about some of those and some of the modalities or applications that bring about those objectives in the best possible way. So modern hydrotherapy is the lower right picture, basically a non-weight bearing or reduced weight bearing, often in water, but not actually using the water itself for the most part as a treatment modality, just mostly reducing the weight on the joints. That's the primary way that hydrotherapy is used today. In the traditional hydrotherapy modalities, you can see one in actual practice, one in a diagram. It's actually based on changing or enhancing the circulatory patterns of the body. So you can see they're keeping the feet warm of the individual. They're doing hot chest fomentation, a cool compress to the head as the body warms, so that the neurological centers don't get overheated during that process. So it's a different objective in modern hydrotherapy than in traditional hydrotherapy and its practice in the early days. So some overview of some of the objectives of hydrotherapy. We'll look at the different things that they are attempting to activate or do, and then look at the ways that, basically in a list form, so this can be used as a reference. We'll talk about each one of these different methodologies of treatment as we go along in future sessions. But first of all, we'll look at the various types of treatments that are good for increasing heat production of the body, so making the body warmer, essentially increasing the metabolism, and the elimination of heat, so having it to throw off more heat. So used often as a tonic. So a tonic is something that tends towards health versus sickness. And these are fever lowering as well. If someone has a fever, you can use this to help reduce the fever by throwing off that excess heat. And this particular list is listed in its order of effectiveness, with the most effective ones noted first. So a graduated bath is the best form of fever reduction. Then a cooling wet sheet pack, followed by a cold friction bath. A prolonged tepid bath at 88 degrees Fahrenheit. So we know that body temperature is 98.6. So this is about 10 degrees cooler. So it's going to be tepid, is going to be cooler. It's not going to be cold, but it will feel cool. And because water has such a high heat capacity, it can absorb a lot of heat. So to raise that water, that bath water, by 1 degree C, it takes a joule of energy, which is a bit of energy to do that. And so with that water being 10 degrees cooler, it can absorb a lot of heat. So a cold full bath, then a short hot full bath, followed by a pale pour or a shower. So a cold full bath, and you can do, so those three things, you could interchange them: the full bath, the pale pour, or the shower, as a wrap up to the cold full bath. A tepid pale pour, a cold pale pour, cold compress, a graduated compress, an evaporating sheet. Do cold to the head and neck, cold to the spine. So these are regionally applied areas of cold that can help to take heat away or reduce fever. Abdominal cold, cold area to the heart, a cold colonic. So that's going to be like an enema or something like that into the colon, and taking a cool or cold enema, for example, is going to be taking the heat from the interior of the body to the core, and that it can be a fairly effective mechanism sometimes. A tepid or cold enema, which is fairly similar. And then drinking cold water, you're going to be using that with all the different ways that it's done. The different applications above: prolonged tepid full bath, drink cold water. And then there's something called the cold air bath too, just the refreshing stimulation of cold air itself. I remember in high school having friends talk about getting sick, and they actually went outside and in the cool and ran around their house several times, and that seemed to help them knock it off, which I never tried that myself, and they seem to be okay, but that could be part of just the cold air bath, and just increasing circulation, helping them to throw off both the heat as well as oxygenate the body to reduce the pathogen load. So treatments that increase heat elimination. So these are going to help throw off heat again in a different way. So these are best used for fever, and a cold bath can be contraindicated. If the cold bath is contraindicated, you can use these options. So these are also in the order of their effectiveness, with the most effective being first. So a 2 to 3 minute hot bath followed by a 1 minute cold bath with friction. So remember that friction synergizes the effects of the cold. So it multiplies this effect. A hot blanket pack, a hot evaporating sheet. So that would be like wrapping you in a sheet that is hot versus one that's tepid or cold, and then letting it evaporate away. Hot sponge bath, a fomentation on the back, on the abdomen, and then followed by a cold enema. Fomentation to the back, followed by a cold wet sheet pack. So then you can do a hot blanket pack and then a graduated bath, or a hot blanket pack and a prolonged tepid bath, or a hot blanket pack and a cold friction. And then there's dry friction and cold friction. So dry friction would be like the nurse you see in the picture here, who's doing friction on the arm. And if it was cold friction, they would be maybe gloves that had been made cold or in cool water before applying the friction element to them. So these are treatments that increase the elimination of heat in the hydrotherapy modality. So treatments that aid the destruction of toxins. So typically increasing heat is a good way to help throw things off. It encourages disease resistance and toxin destruction, particularly through the thyroid, liver, spleen, and lymphatics. Remember that your skin is the largest excretory organ of the body. Even though we don't like to think of our skin as an excretory organ, it is a place where we rid ourselves of lots of toxins. So good sweat is a very beneficial thing. So a radiant heat bath. So you can do this in a technical way, or even just a simple radiant heater, like a quartz heater or something like that, a propane heater, sitting close to the radiant heat as it comes out and warms the body. A sweating wet sheet pack, another way to do that. So the wet sheet pack its goal is to bring you to a sweat, and that helps to not only destroy the toxins, but helps them to come through the skin. A steam bath, so an important procedure to promote sweating, and then remove the sweat as it's formed on the body. So don't just leave it there, just wipe it away, and that helps to clear the pores and also remove the toxins that may be coming through the skin through the sweat. So you've probably all been sweating before and licked your lips and tasted it salty. So those are electrolytes that are coming through the sweat, and there also will be other toxins, metabolic byproducts that are released through the skin, in addition to just electrolytes. So there's some treatments that also increase the white blood cell activity of the body, so leukocyte activity, and that's one thing that you get with a contrast shower, and that's what we see with an alternating heating compress, or just the alternating hot cold routine. So the only white blood cells are these 5 categories: basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. Those are the white blood cells that we have in our body, and they typically will become more prominent if someone does a blood panel. They're going to look for, one of the things they look for is if there's an elevated white blood cell count, then you know that there's some kind of an infection. And then if you go and look specifically at what type of white blood cells are most prevalent, then you can get an idea of what area of infection that might be. So for example, if you have general inflammation, there's going to be increased number of basophils. That's a white blood cell that comes and is primarily activated during inflammatory processes. Eosinophils can also do that, but they also are there when there are larger parasites present. And so that can be a possible indicator of a parasitic infection. Neutrophils are predominantly present in connection with bacteria and fungi that are needing to be ridded from the body. Monocytes, they become macrophages. Macro means big, phagy is to eat, so they're big eaters. These are basically the cleanup crew of your body, and they're going to be coming around and ridding it of anything that's broken down, damaged, destroyed, the underlying basis of the inflammatory process. The basophils may come into play. So a secondary increase in white blood cells would be those monocytes coming in to take the garbage out. Lymphocytes are your primary defense mechanisms, the B cells and the T cells. There's a whole list of different types of T cells. There's the CD4, the CD8, the T helper cell, the T suppressor cells, tumor suppressor cells, natural killer cells, that's the NKCs, and viruses and tumors. They're going to be ridding those. So basically, they're going to be defending against pathogenic infestation of the body and aiding in the release of toxins. So the things that can help accelerate that, again, we talked about contrast showers, which aren't on this list here, but a cold bath will do that. So part of a cold bath could be to eliminate heat from fever, but as a side benefit, it will also increase the white blood cell count, which when you're sick, that is a good benefit. So there may be overlap in these treatments and have dual or triplicate benefits associated with them. So a heating compress, changing it often. So keeping that cycle going, not letting it get too tepid, and then an alternating heating compress. The contrast showers is actually a very beneficial way to help increase the immune system. My wife participated in a study during PT school as a student where she did contrast showers, and they actually did a blood draw and noted their their pre-experience white blood cell leukocyte counts and their post-experience, and noted a statistically significant increase in white blood cell activity. So that it does function to increase your immunity. So there are treatments that can promote bacterial elimination from the skin and kidneys. So again, your skin is your largest excretory organ. Steam baths, they can be, complex steam baths like the one you see here, or they can simply be your own little steam tent with a boiling pot of water with a blanket over it, and you sitting in a tent kind of underneath it. So you makeshift personal sauna. You can do that. Have a plastic tablecloth or sheet to kind of help trap the heat. A sweating wet sheet pack can also be functional that way, and a prolonged neutral bath. So a neutral bath would be right about body temperature. So not hot, not cold, just neutral. So you can stay in that almost indefinitely. Also, a sweating bath and drinking lots of water will help both the kidneys do their elimination processes and create urine for elimination, as well as aiding the fluid as it leaves the body through sweat. So each treatment, follow it with a cold mitten friction, a cold towel rub, or other cold treatment. So you can use the kind of abrasive, they're not abrasive, but a glove with a nap on it for the increasing the friction, or you could just go do a polar plunge. Doesn't have to be a polar plunge, that's just for fun, but that certainly would count if you wanted to do that. And just a quick jump in the pool or a cold bath would be a cold quench, essentially, that you would have after having been warmed up. And then you wouldn't want to stay in there too long because you wouldn't want to get chilled, but just enough to kind of shock the system a little bit and send that blood in a different direction. So 2 weekends ago, we were camping up in the North Cascades, and there was some pools of water that still had ice in them. And I took a plunge, went and took a quick swim. And the first one got in, it was really cold, got out pretty quick, but I warmed up pretty quick, and I was pretty surprised. And I felt pretty good. And I thought, well, I'll do that again. And I did it again. And after that one, I was actually a little colder and didn't warm up quite as fast. So kind of my takeaway from that is that a quick cold plunge allows you to just kind of briefly shock the system, drive the blood to the core, but then you stay warm, and it kind of has a warming effect. Whereas if you overdo it, like twice may have overdone it in that situation, it was ice water essentially, and it has more of a cooling effect, a more prolonged cooling effect, rather than just a quick cool and then a warm back up. So there are various treatments that promote oxidation. So oxidation is essentially what happens when you have oxygen in your body and you're going through metabolism. If you have oxidation, antioxidants are those things that are taking and not allowing oxygen to be, the free radical oxygen, to be damaging. But oxidation is the natural process of metabolism. So a cold bath promotes oxygen absorption and carbon dioxide elimination. Interestingly enough, cold water holds more oxygen than warm water too, but it increases the circulation. It also helps initiate or promote the breakdown of fats and carbohydrates, essentially energy sources in our body. So those fats can be converted into energy, and if someone is seeking to have fat reduced, this could be one way to help mitigate or reduce the fat stores of the body. So all cold treatments tend towards breakdown as the body converts them into energy and ATP to create heat and warm the body. So the most powerful or beneficial of this type of treatment, oxidation, is a prolonged cold bath. So keeping a cold bath for a longer period of time. A dripping sheet rub. So this is not a wrung out sheet, but one that is essentially saturated and dripping wet. So you'd want to have an appropriate place to do that. Plenty of protective sheet covering, or in a tile or bathtub or something like that, to keep from damaging any furniture or housewares. rubbing shallow bath. So a shallow bath, not a deep bath, that includes friction, a cold full bath, a plunge, so a quick dip in cold water. And so this is an order of their power, a cooling wet sheet pack. So the person on the table here has a cooling wet sheet pack that's been applied, and they have a little wrap up around their head too. The diagram below shows a basic wrapping procedure. Just have the person lay on the wet sheet and then wrap half of it over one way and half the other way and tuck it in. And then you could also have another layer there too, and put that on as well. It depends on how it's applied. So that person there is laying on a therapy table with a wet sheet pack in place. So these treatments are good for nitrogen oxidation. So hot treatments are best. So a hot full bath, a heating wet sheet pack, a dry pack, a steam bath using hot air, a sun bath, so just getting out in the sun is a good way to do that. Of course, the side benefit of the sun is you're going to be increasing your vitamin D levels in addition to that, which have been shown over and over to be very important in helping promote wellness. Radiant heat. So in the old days, Dr. Kellogg had created a light booth with incandescent lights in it to do that. You can do it in maybe like a tanning bed too, light therapy essentially, but you're getting the radiant heat from that. And you could use a quartz heater or a radiant heater of some kind to affect the same results. So remember, after every heating treatment, you want to quench it with a very short cold application. So it'll be like a quick cold shower or a dip in a cool pool or something like that. So whatever method is appropriate for the situation. It could be a cold mitten friction or a sponge down, but don't want to prolong that. It needs to be quick, and the person needs to be kept comfortable in the process too. So one way to do that in someone who may be immobile is to make sure that their feet stay warm, because that gives a localized impression of heat throughout the entire body to have the feet warmed as well. So treatment that excites the central nervous system ganglia. So ganglia are essentially nerve centers or clusters of nerves in the body within the central nervous system that have various functions and roles. So places that they might be beneficial are adynamic fevers. So essentially that's a weak fever, not one that's increasing or climbing, but just like a low-grade fever. Neurasthenic conditions. So neurasthenic are characterized by lassitude, fatigue, headache, and irritability, and often associated with emotional disturbances. So these treatments can be helpful for that. Hypopesia, essentially that's weak digestion. Renal insufficiency, so essentially the kidneys aren't functioning as they ought to. And there can be a variety of different reasons for why the kidney isn't functioning. If you look at the person's on the intake evaluation, if they have history of alcohol use or other medications, perhaps can have kidney and lower liver damage, that could also be a part of it. But it can help to increase their activity. And various organ congestion. So basically congestion is just like traffic congestion. Everything slows down. Everything just comes to almost a screeching halt, or goes very, very slow. And we want to have constantly flowing circulatory system. It's known as hemorrheology or blood fluidity. There's a book called The Methuselah Factor that talks about the fact that blood needs to flow very easily throughout the body, and when it becomes slow and sludgy, or the vessels become constricted so that the blood cells can't get through them, then you have congestion and you have disease that actually follows that. So one action of hydrotherapy, as we talked about earlier, is that it functions as a pump in addition to the heart and can work to draw blood to and from a particular locality by vasodilating and vasoconstricting, increasing and decreasing the size of the blood vessels to allow the blood cells to pass through. And then you can alternate the local compresses on a limb or a digit or some other place of the body that needs to have those compresses present. So this is an example of someone who's doing the hot foot bath. They got the hot water by, they've got their foot in the bowl, they've got a blanket on, they've got a cold pack on the head, and they are maybe they're suffering from a headache and or congestion in the head. So they're drawing that congestion down away from the affected part of the body and changing the flow of circulation and increasing its flow and helping to open up the body's circulatory system. So remember that you can revisit these presentations at preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com and review past ones and look forward to future ones.